The Trump administration is radically reshaping America and the world around it. In the inaugural Vantage Point essay from Australia Institute Press, Dr. Emma Shortis examines Trump's grim vision for America and the future of the Australia-US alliance. Pre-order your copy of After America, Australia and the New World Order, or become a Foundation subscriber to Vantage Point at australiainstitute.org.au/store or via the link in the show notes. Hello and welcome to Dollars and Cents, the Australia Institute podcast where we're talking about just what the hell is going on in the economy. I'm Elinor Johnston-Leake, the senior content producer here at the Australia Institute, and as always, I'm talking to our chief economist, Greg Jericho. How are you, Greg?
I'm doing spectacular, Elinor.
That's great.
2 days to go for the election,
Yep.
So running out of batteries, but hey, we're nearly there.
Nearly there. It's almost over. Yeah. But there's still some economics to talk about before we get there.
Always. The economy just keeps on keeping on, keeps on churning out the numbers.
It don't stop coming. It don't stop coming. And it don't, because new CPI figures are out this week.
Core inflation data fell back within the Reserve Bank's target range.
Getting underlying inflation into the target band is a really big deal.
It's the first time it's happened in more than 3 years.
Under Labor, we've seen groceries go up by 30%. Gas, electricity, insurance, all up by over 30%. Your homegrown inflation has had this impact. There is a better way. We know how to beat inflation, and you've completely failed to achieve that.
You literally just made those numbers up.
The CPI is the Consumer Price Index. It's sort of a general measure of prices in the economy. Which is your favourite thing to talk about? And are there any opinions?
Oh, yeah. there were some numbers and some went up, some went down, and let's move on. No.
And that's the
these
podcast.
Were kind of the last numbers that the government had to worry about before the election, not just because pretty much are the last numbers that come out before the election, but given cost of living has been a massive issue of the election campaign, interest rates as well. If these numbers were bad for the government, in the last couple of days, they would have to be doing some really fast talking and explaining, this is just a temporary blip or something.
Yeah.
Nothing you really want to be doing. But what happened was the inflation figures on Wednesday came out. They went from 2.4% annual growth in December to 2.4% in March.
Okay.
So no real change, which was fine because 2.4% annual growth of inflation is very low. It's, in the bottom half of the Reserve Bank's 2 to 3% range. But even better for the government, and especially because this has kind of been the number that Peter Dutton had been banging on about, the core or underlying inflation measure, which is what the RBA likes to kind of focus on because it gives a bit of a longer-term view of what's happening with inflation because it gets rid of the top 15% rises and the bottom 15% falls. Mm-hmm. So it kind of looks at what's happening in the middle.
Yep.
And so that was the key figure. And in December, it was 3.3%, so above that 3% mark. And so Peter Dutton be going, core inflation is really high, and that's a sign, if you're managing the economy well, you can bring down core inflation. And core inflation came down to 2.9%, so it's under 3%. So Jim Chalmers just absolutely sprinted to the microphone on Wednesday.
This is a powerful demonstration of the progress that Australians have made together in the economy. This is proof of the responsible economic management, which has been a defining feature of this Albanese Labor government.
And he was very happy with that line, especially because you saw like ABC and everything running with the headline that core inflation, underlying inflation is below 3%. And that kind of killed Peter Dutton's message about inflation.
Well, I mean, a third of voters already voted, so I suppose, they wouldn't be changing their votes anyway. But, It is interesting when things happen this late in the game. So is there anything else interesting about these new figures, or are they kind of just as predicted?
They were a little bit higher than expected. In fact, Matt Grudenoff, the senior economist, and I, we were kind of wondering if it might get closer to 2%. But what we'd forgotten is that we've had all these energy rebates, not just the government's energy rebates, but there's been various state ones as well. And they have all started and ended at different times. And what we saw in this quarter was essentially the Queensland state energy rebate, which was $1,000, that kind of had been all used up. So that meant, in effect, the electricity prices in Brisbane absolutely soared, about 340%.
Oh, wow.
Which, I mean, it sounds like, they went up heaps. All that meant was the subsidy finished. You know, so prices had stayed the same. It's just what customers were paying. They were no longer getting the rebate. So that kind of flowed through and affected the national picture as well, and so made it seem like it was probably a bit higher than it otherwise would be. But again, that didn't really affect anything else. You know, look, overall, everything was kind of good. Around 2/3 of all the items in the CPI's basket of goods, and there's about 80 different goods and services like bread, cereals, soft drink, shoes,
But
petrol.
it's not just physical goods, isn't it?
No, it's also services.
Yeah.
So it'll be, personal care, medical services, equipment repair, motor mechanic, that type of stuff.
Yep.
All of these things, there's about 80 different goods and services, and about 2/3 of them rose in prices over the last year by lower than 3%. So it kind of suggests that it's a pretty broad scope of inflation being down. So that's good, but still things. The big driver of prices was rents. Rents was the number one thing, and that certainly kind of is a weird thing in that probably rents has been the thing that has not been talked about much this election campaign.
No, it's in house prices.
Yeah. Whenever they're talking about housing affordability, it's we're building more houses
for first home buyers.
Yeah, for first home buyers, and not a lot of, one way you can also increase housing affordability is make it affordable for people to rent in these things. And so governments should actually be building to rent. I mean, there's nothing wrong with governments renting, being a renter and being a model renter and not one who's going to just give you a 3-month contract or raise your rent every 6 months or tell you to get out. If governments actually had good quality, low rent, properties available, that takes pressure off of other areas and brings down overall rents, because it means people on really low incomes are not competing for rents with other people. And, so we haven't had much talk about that, which is really weird because rents have just been the big driver of inflation over the last couple of years. And that's still continuing, coming down a bit, but still there. Other things that we're driving, but the big ones in March quarter that always happen at education, that's just because it's the start of the school year. And so fees come out. And so they're always a big driver in March. But overall, really good figures. The likelihood of interest rate cut still pretty much guaranteed. The market is fully pricing in that the Reserve Bank is going to cut at least once. And there's around a 55% chance that they'll even do a 50 basis point cut.
Well, yeah, speaking of interest rates, we did ask last week for people to send in questions, to do a bit of a Q&A on the pod this week, especially, any questions they had around the election. And one of the questions we got was, what's the likelihood of getting 5 interest rate cuts as is being predicted by the market?
Yeah, it's been such a quick change to go from, there might be a couple and there might be 3 to there might be 5 by the end of the year. It's really hard because we kind of have to factor in Donald Trump. That's kind of the main reason. I think a couple interest rate cuts are pretty likely, purely because that kind of gets us back to a bit more of a neutral setting of our interest rates, because our interest rates are currently high and actually slowing the economy. The Reserve Bank's going to want to get back to a more neutral setting. The more likely we'll get more rate cuts than that is dependent on whether Donald Trump continues to be an idiot.
Yeah, well,
so,
I mean...
Okay, well, that makes it pretty clear. But, what we're talking about there is the tariffs. Yeah. Is he actually going to go through with his tariffs, or is he going to keep blinking and keep sort of putting things
Yeah.
off.
I did a 90-day pause for the people that didn't retaliate because I told them if you retaliate, we're going to double it. Maybe the children will have $2 instead of $30, you know? And maybe the $2 will cost a couple of bucks more than they would normally.
He also said this about the tariff relief he's about to give automakers.
We're just giving them a little chance because in some cases they can't get the parts fast enough. So this is just a little transition. It's a little bit of help for people that will be doing a great job.
It's really hard to know what he's doing. It seems like he's always finding a way to put off the tariffs, but he keeps committing to them coming back, and that's sort of upsetting the thing. So the 5 interest rate cuts are more likely if the tariffs come in. If they don't, probably not. But as I say, I'm not a financial advisor. Don't go investing on the futures market on the back of this. But I think it's unlikely if Donald Trump at least retains some degree of sanity.
Yeah. And there's another question about this exact topic that we got in the emails. A person was asking about the potential impact of Trump's tariffs on Australia indirectly via exchange rates. They said, from what I understand, tariff make USD go up. And somehow that means inflation in Australia might also go up. Why would tariffs make US dollars go up in value relative to other currencies? And is the impact on Australia via the increased costs of imports or something else?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good nerdy economic question. Should be in an economics uni exam. Basically, because as we say, a tariff, we know, makes things more expensive in America.
Yeah.
So how does that sort of get offset? What's one thing that can happen to make something cheaper, make imports cheaper, is the value of that currency goes down. So, like, we know that when the Australian dollar falls, that makes our exports to America cheaper.
Yeah.
Because they only have to spend 60 US cents to buy a dollar's worth of Australian goods rather than 70 US cents. Okay, so it's cheaper. So one thing that naturally happens, if a tariff is making imports for Americans more expensive, then what happens is the exchange rate kind of falls from Australia, China relative to America. So to kind of offset that increase in price. So what that does is it makes the American dollar stronger. Now, again, let's follow it through. When the value of our dollar gets weaker, yes, it makes our exports cheaper, but it makes our imports more expensive. Getting stuff from America is more expensive because we're having to pay $2 to get $1 worth of American goods instead of $1.50 or something like that, So that's the concern that what could happen from the tariffs is if they are worldwide and they're really strong, might make the American dollar stronger and make our imports more expensive. And because
when you say our imports, ours Australians.
Yeah. The things that we're importing from America are more expensive. And so as a result, inflation goes up. That could be a consequence. But it's something that I think we only have to worry about if Trump sort of goes fully on with the tariffs that he announced a month ago. Otherwise, it's kind of all going to wash out a bit.
Okay. But if the US dollar is strong, doesn't that, I mean, you know how much Trump likes things to be strong. Isn't that good for him?
Well, not if you want to manufacture stuff in America. And this
Which is something he's been talking about.
He wants to do. I mean, think back to, back in around 2010, 2011, when we were at parity with the American dollar. So basically one Australian dollar equaled one US dollar. So the Australian dollar was really strong. And that was terrible for our manufacturing sector, especially car manufacturers, because it meant our exports to America and other nations was really expensive because they weren't, as we're saying, if your dollar is weak, that makes your exports cheap, makes your imports expensive. We reverse it, and let's say America is really strong. That means all their manufacturing, why are we going to buy it from America? It's really expensive. We'll buy it from somewhere else. And so, it all goes to talking about why the tariff policy is just dumb because it's kind of self-defeating if it comes into play. And also, as we have talked about previously, he's so erratic that he's defeating the whole point of the policy because business leaders are not going to make multi-billion-dollar decisions to move factories or build new factories when you've got a loon who might change his mind an hour after you turn the first sod in your factory. So, really interesting though how tariffs are all sort of mucking around things.
Yeah. Well, we've got another question. Someone asked you on Blue Sky, something a bit more relevant to the election. I hope someone examines the issue of endless and expensive new policies that have to be funded into the future while simultaneously promising more tax cuts, brackets less revenue, and no party has plans to build economy, brackets revenue, in time of Donald Trump's madness.
Well, putting aside Donald Trump's madness, it's a really good point, and one that we've been kind of banging on about is that, look, it's fine if you want to spend $21 billion on defense, great. How are you going to pay for it? Because unless you've suddenly become a proponent of modern monetary theory, which I can tell you Peter Dutton is not, where we can just have endless deficits and we don't have to worry about it, you got to pay for it somehow. And there's only two ways you can pay for it, either cut spending elsewhere or raise more revenue. And no one's raising more revenue. And
because that means taxes.
That means taxes, or it means actually having to hold businesses to account. And we've certainly been talking about how, we give away $10, $11, $12 billion a year in fossil fuel tax credits. We give away gas for free. We don't charge a royalty for that. We barely tax it with the petroleum resource rent tax. We give away, $20 billion in tax breaks to the richest 10% for superannuation to encourage them to save so they won't be on the age pension, which they'd never be able to qualify. We give $13 billion for capital gains tax discounts and negative gearing, and $13 billion is just, just distorting the hell out of the housing market at the same time. We do all of these things, and at the same time you hear government say, oh, we have to live within our means. We can't afford these things except when it's defence or other things in which they can afford, or it's nuclear power stations. Apparently we can afford. We'll put them off budget, and that means we can afford it. There really has not been a good debate this election campaign or the last election campaign about tax, in the sense of we are an extremely low taxing nation, and yet we are also a nation who believes that government should provide good services, should, not have people living in poverty, and yet we don't tax in that way. If you want to have decent services, if you want to have benefits that ensure that people can live with dignity while they're on the age pension or on job seeker, you need the revenue. And we are not raising revenue, and we actually have a tax system that has so many holes in it that gives money to people who really don't need it for things that are not needed. And it means we're encouraging bad things, encouraging more emissions, encouraging higher inequality. And it's a really good point that this election campaign has all been about, oh, we're giving a tax cut. And it's like, okay, but we're already a low taxing nation. Why aren't you looking at what companies are doing? Why aren't you looking at what, some of the wealthiest people in Australia are being able to get away with?
I mean, do you just think that there's not enough political willpower because, I don't know, they're scared of backlash from wealthy individuals or business sectors?
Well, we can see it through the superannuation changes that the government has been trying to get through, which were going to reduce the taxation concessions on earnings in superannuation funds over $3 million, and just the earnings applying to that section of your fund that is the over $3 million bit.
99.5% of people with superannuation are unaffected by this reform. Under 80,000 people will be impacted by this.
And yet we're seeing, just even in this last week, the Australian running pretty hard on it. Peter Dutton and Angus Taylor talking it up, suggesting that, again, it's an inheritance tax, a death tax, and things like that. And it's just, you think, cripes, this is just going to affect 80,000 people.
0.5% of people.
0.5%. No, most people have no hope of ever getting anywhere within cooey of $3 million. And yet this has been painted as a really tough thing to get done. And it should be it should be something that people go, really? They get a tax break? You know? And instead not. And to the government's credit, at least they're keeping with that one. But not doing anything else, and certainly not doing anything with regards to companies and gas companies that really needs to happen.
Yeah. All right. Probably got time for one more question from the emails. We got one. We've covered this a little bit a while ago, but it has come up again during the election. What actually is bracket creep? And is it something I actually need to be worried about?
Bracket creep is an economist that you meet in a dodgy pub who is coming.
I'm scared already.
No. Yeah, bracket creep, which got a little bit of a run there for a bit when halfway during the campaign, Peter Dutton decided to have an interview with The Australian where he said it was an ambition of his to remove bracket creep fully by indexing the tax brackets, and put out, so is this a policy? Oh, no, just an ambition one day, which is, oh my gosh, that was Peter Dutton's campaign in a nutshell, really.
Yeah. But what is bracket
bracket creep is basically when you are doing the same job, you haven't got a promotion or anything, but you've got a pay rise, and that pay rise is basically just to help take care of inflation. So let's say inflation is 3% and you get a 3% pay rise. That means your real wage hasn't increased at all. So price has gone up 3%, your wage has gone up 3%, you can buy the same amount of stuff. You're not better off. But income tax brackets are not adjusted for inflation. So if your pay goes up 3% and you go into a higher tax bracket, it doesn't matter that your real wage hasn't increased, you're paying more tax.
Yeah.
That's bracket creep.
Okay.
So to get rid of bracket creep, all you'd need to do is every year index the tax brackets. So it's the tax-free threshold's 18,200. Then the next tax bracket is 45,000. Then the next one is 135,000. God, I had to think about that. Then the next one's 190,000. You could index those every year. They just go up in line with inflation. So that's one way you could do that. The reason governments don't do that, one, it is kind of expensive because you're in effect giving a tax cut every year in nominal terms, and government budgets are in real nominal dollars. We don't sort of go, oh, I've got $7 billion in tax revenue this year. Oh, but once I account for inflation, it's actually, no, this is how much cash it got sitting in our coffers. So it's expensive doing that. Also, it means they don't get to do a tax cut maybe after 5 years and say, oh, here's a tax cut. And in reality, you're just sort of accounting for inflation and bracket creep. So that's kind of why it's not done. Also, and I often get a lot of people asking me on social media, we should, index the tax brackets. And I'm like, yeah, okay, fine. But let's say we start from here, start from now. And let's say, okay, if we index them, are we saying that actually now the current income tax system is the way we want it to be? Do we think this is the good place to start from? And this was especially before the stage 3 tax cuts went through. I'm like, so you really think the tax brackets that Scott Morrison came up with are the good starting point? It's always a bit weird, the sort of sense of, if we index the tax brackets, then everything's great. I'm like, yeah, but maybe it's stuffed at the moment. Maybe we should be those, the higher income tax bracket should be lower or higher or something, or we shouldn't have a tax bracket going from 45,000 to 135. There should be another one at 90,000 or something like that. So
you would just prefer like a reassessment of our tax brackets?
Look, I think one of the problems with indexing the tax brackets is that governments are then like, okay, do we touch income tax again, or it's always just more cuts again and again and again. As I say, our problem is not that we need more income tax cuts, it's that we actually are a low taxing nation, and bracket creep, I think, is overstated as a problem. The main reason economists like to say that bracket creep's a bad thing is, it creates a disincentive in you wanting to get a pay rise, or if you earn more, you're not going to want to work as hard because you're getting taxed higher. And it's like, really? Has anyone really turned down a pay rise because they're going, my average tax rate's going to go up if I get this pay rise?
But only on the amount above.
Yeah, and it's only on the amount above. It really is overstated as a disincentive because, let's be honest, we are not all rational individuals who take into account, what's the present value of my income and what's the opportunity cost of me working an extra hour, getting paid more once I deduct the tax, and also if that affects any of my government payment. We basically a pay rise, great, I'll take it. Or
more money.
Yeah, and what we also see is a lot of confusion over bracket creep with people saying, we got to index the tax brackets because if you get a better paying job, that's bracket creep. It's like, no, you're getting a better paying job, and because we've got a progressive tax system, you're now earning more, which means you deserve to be taxed more because you can afford it.
Yeah.
That's how it kind of works, and that's a fair way to do it. Look, I don't get too concerned about bracket creep, but if you are concerned about bracket creep, really all you need to worry about is those on low incomes, because they're the ones who are most affected by bracket creep. And I worry that indexing the tax brackets is a bit more about trying to give those on the benefits will be a bit more geared towards higher income people. And I think let's not be reducing revenue at a time when we actually should be ensuring that we've got enough revenue to pay for all these things that we need paid for.
Fair enough. All right. Well, thank you to everyone for sending in your questions, but that's probably all we've got time for.
Thank you, Elinor, and thank you everyone for sending in the questions. We will try and do some more of these later on in the year, maybe one where we'll devote the entire episode to it rather than me banging on about inflation, which everyone just loves.
Yeah, we love it.
We do.
Yeah.
That ends it for this week. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We will be back next week. There will be a next week after the election. Oh, my God.
Look, don't jinx it.
What will happen? What will happen? Who can say? But Elinor won't be here. I'm going to give a spoiler to everyone.
Oh, yeah.
She's not going to be here.
I'll be away, but I'll be back the week after.
You'll be back.
Yes.
So we'll probably have our super guest host, Hayden, probably stepping in to fill Elinor's shoes.
So look forward to that.
But this episode of Dollars and Cents was recorded, can you believe it, on the 1st of May. We're into May, best month of the year, and some things may have changed. One thing that is going to possibly change is the government, and that's happening on Saturday. And a special note to everybody, this Saturday from 5:30, Ebony Bennett, Amy Ramikis and Richard Dennis, they're going to be doing an election night live stream. They're going to be talking about what's been happening on the ground. Amy Ramikis has got everyone's number and everyone likes to talk to her, so she really has her finger on the pulse. Richard Dennis and Ebony will be sort of fielding questions. They'll be talking about what actually is going on with the minority parliament if that happens, preferential voting, all will be explained. It's going to be great. It's going to be on YouTube and Facebook, so go to our Facebook account or search for us on YouTube and you'll be able to find it. It's going to be really good. So make sure if you're doing your election night watch party, have it on. It's going to be great. Other than that, if you want to find out more about inflation and all the numbers that were going on this week, have a read of my column on the Guardian Australia site. And for more research and everything that's been going on with this election, go to our website, which is at australiainstitute.org.au. Our theme music, as always, is by Blue Dot Sessions. Everyone, have a great week. Enjoy your sausage sizzle on Saturday if you haven't already voted. And we'll see you all next week.
See ya.